Hey, good day, my beautiful children. Today is Thursday, May the 14th. And I got a curveball for you. I had talked about maybe going and doing China last, but I have decided, in my infinite wisdom, that we're going to skip that. Uh, because if you understand the Cold War and you understand communism and revolutions, which we should all understand at this point, you can kind of apply all those things to China. Normally, we do a full unit on that and a bunch of other stuff. I'm going to end here, I think, with Gandhi, and if we end up finishing with Gandhi, maybe I'll do a little bit of Africa. But I want to do Gandhi because one, not a lot of people know a whole lot about India and the history of India, and I feel like now, in the time we're living right now, what's going on, that Gandhi's message and what he stood for um, is necessary, is important, and so we're going to talk about Gandhi, who's an amazing person. You can count on one hand the number of people in world history who have brought change to the world without violence or threat of violence. There's all kinds of we've learned all year about all kinds of people that have changed the world with war and armies and violence. Here's a guy uh, who did not fight, would not fight, and brought major change. So I feel like it's a great message. So here is Gandhi, and this is a long story because it follows his entire life, and he lived to be very old. And this guy was like you look at him. I don't know what you know about Gandhi, but he looks like this, little withered old man, and that and he was, later in his life. But man, so full of wisdom and also funny. The dude was hilarious, although he spoke very quietly. You had to really pay attention to what he was saying. Anyway, there's a lot of Gandhi quotes that I could start with. This is the one I wanted to use. There are many causes that I am prepared to die for, but there are no causes that I am prepared to kill for. That kind of sums up Gandhi in a nutshell. He was a pacifist. He was not afraid to die for his cause and for his country, but he was not willing to hurt others in order to achieve his goals. So that's pretty rare nowadays. All right, so let's start talking about this. So a couple things about India that you need to understand before we get into Gandhi. India was for millennia. It was one of the oldest civilizations in the world, and for thousands of years they governed themselves, and then in the 1400s, 1500s, here come the British as part of imperialism and expansionism. The British came to India, and they were there really for one reason, that was to exploit the land so that they could grow two crops that were very important to the British. Tea, which, as you know, is super important to British customs, and does not grow in England, so they needed a warm climate to grow it in, and also indigo, which was used during the Industrial Revolution to dye cloth. And they also needed cotton, Indian cotton, which would then be shipped to English textile mills during the Industrial Revolution. And you guys remember our discussion of that, our unit on the Industrial Revolution. What product drove the Industrial Revolution? Cloth, textiles. And how do you make it? Well, you use British wool, you use Indian cotton. Anyway, when the British got there, kind of like all their colonies, the government didn't really care at all about India or what was going on in India. They let a company called the British East India Trading Company, which, if you've seen the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, you probably heard of, same company. They gave them a charter and they let them run India, and didn't care about India for hundreds of years until it became apparent that there was a lot of money to be made there. And then here comes the British Crown, and they brought with them British law, and they just like most all imperialistic nations, um, they lorded over India, and and squeezed every nickel and dime they could out of India and its people, with very little care at all for the actual people living there. And so, if you were an Indian living in India under British law, under British authority and rule, life was hard, and not for all of them. The Indians at that time, they had what was called a caste system. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but a caste system is a social system where you're born into a social group, and then that's it. You don't advance, you don't go down, you just kind of stay in that caste. And it's very rigid. If you're in the lower caste, then you're very poor, and that's all you're ever going to be. And people. Actually, they're called the Untouchables because literally the British people and the other Indian people in the higher castes would not touch these people. Um, and those people lived in poverty, and and the British used this caste system against the Indian people themselves. They figured, well, there's no way they can ever unite to get rid of us, so we'll use this against them. So they created a system called the Raj, which they let Indian people kind of govern themselves under British authority, and so that's how it worked for hundreds and hundreds of years. And it was very hard on the British people or the Indian people. Uh, for example, the British landlords, they would force the Indians to grow indigo and cotton and tea and nothing else or very little else. Well, there's three things about those products that are in common, and that is you can't eat any of them. And so, these Indians would grow these crops, these cash crops for the British, and not grow anything to live on. And so, oftentimes there would be famine, and millions of Indians would die, and it was very bad. Now, the British did do some good things. For example, they built railroads all over India, and they created a school system for the upper caste Indian people. But for the most part, if you were Indian living in India under British rule, it was a hard life. It was very tough. All right, so that's the beginning of the story. Let's talk about Gandhi. Gandhi was born to one of the middle castes, and his parents had enough money to send him to law school in London, which many Indian kids did, and he became a barrister, a lawyer. And so if you look at this picture here on the left, that is Gandhi wearing very British clothing, minus the Indian headdress. He's wearing a British suit, and he was going to be a lawyer. And so his first job was going to be in South Africa. There were a lot of Indians living in South Africa, which was also a British colony, and they were building railroads throughout South Africa. And the Indian people there had very little rights, just like they had very little rights in India. And so Gandhi went there to help people. And something happened to him early in his career that really had a profound impact on him. He bought a first class ticket because he was a lawyer on a train in South Africa. He got it through the mail. And when he got on the train, he was thrown off because they did not allow Indians or any people of color to ride in white train cars. And so even though he argued, I'm a lawyer, I bought this ticket, didn't matter. They booted him off the train. And this was a very humbling experience for him. And it showed him how oppressive the British were. And it started him kind of on his way towards working for Indian rights and Indian independence. So, of course, I have pictures that are covering these up. And I think what it says is he began to work for Indian rights and independence before World War I. So Gandhi starts his career as a lawyer in the late 1800s and up into the early 1900s, right around the time World War I is taking place. He's working in South Africa on Indian rights, and he got arrested. He got arrested a bunch in his life, and actually, if you added it up, spent something like 7 years in prison, something crazy like that. But he practiced what was called passive resistance. And what that means is he would resist British laws that he thought were unfair. He'd break the law, and then whatever the British decided to do to him, he would take. So one of the things he did is there was a law that said that all Indians had to present. They had passbooks that were given to all Indians. White people didn't have to have them. Indians did at all times. And so he thought that was unjust and unfair, that law was. And so he organized a burning of the passbooks, and he was arrested for it. And he went to jail willingly. So that's kind of how he operates throughout his time, through his career. He targets laws he thinks are unfair. He breaks those laws peacefully, and then he takes whatever punishment. But the one thing he always did is he always made sure two things. One, that the British prosecute him to the fullest extent of their law. And why? Why does anybody want to go to jail? You shouldn't. Because he wanted to show the British how stupid their laws were and how unfair they were. And the other thing he always made sure is every time he got thrown in prison, he made sure there were newspaper people there and photographers to catalog and get proof of what the British were doing to him, so that it would be put in all the papers all over the world. So eventually he becomes the leader of the Indian National Congress. So India had created a group where they were going to try and get some self rule from the British. It's called the Indian National Congress. But there was a problem with the Congress, and that was that they were split in kind of four directions. Two of the directions were religious. Muslims, a big chunk of India is Muslim, and an even larger chunk of India is Hindu, and so they were split up in that regard, and they are also split between traditionalists who wanted to return India to the old days before the British were there, and modernists who wanted to continue to enjoy some of the things that the British had brought with them, but still remain independent. Well, Gandhi was Hindu, and he was also a traditionalist. And so in these pictures, you see he's not dressed in British suits now; he's dressed in Indian traditional clothing. And for the rest of his life, that's how he dressed. And the older he got, the more traditional he became. And so if you see a lot of pictures of Gandhi as an older man, he's wearing basically a robe, almost like a toga, made from homespun cloth. And one of the things Gandhi did is he thought correctly that the British exploited the Indians for their cotton, and then Indians would turn right around and grow this cotton for next to nothing, and then buy expensive British cloth or clothing. And Gandhi was like, "That's stupid. It's our cotton. We should take it and we should make our own clothes." So he began a homespun movement where he would sit every day and he would spin and weave cotton into cloth and then make his own clothes, which seems like a little thing, but it was very symbolic. A lot of what Gandhi did was very, very, very symbolic. All right. This is the last thing we're talking about today. Satyagraha, which is Hindi for basically it means truth force, I guess is the closest translation. So, like I said, he advocated civil disobedience through passive resistance. What does that mean? It means to break laws, but not every law or any law. It means to break laws that you feel are unfair or unjust. That's the civil disobedience part. And then passive resistance means peacefully resisting. So that meant no riots, no killing of British soldiers or citizens. If they try to beat you, you take it. You just sit there and let them wail on you, and then hope that British goodwill keeps them from killing you. Sometimes it did, and a lot of times it didn't. So it's easy to protest something. It's really easy to be violent. I find it's super hard to sit there and take it while someone is committing acts of violence against you. Not many people could do it. It takes a lot of courage to sit there and turn the other cheek, and that's what Gandhi was able to do. One of the other things he did is he organized a boycott of British goods. He thought that one of the best ways to hurt the British was economically, and so that's what the homespun movement was part of. Quit buying British goods and helping England keep our cotton for ourselves and make our own clothing. And that was very, very effective. And then another thing he did was he organized the Salt March, which was a very symbolic thing. So you need salt to live. Salt is not only delicious; it's necessary to live. And the British, the Indians would get salt from the Indian Ocean, and they would make salt, and then the British would tax them. Not a lot, but they would tax them on it, and that was symbolic. The message there was, "We own you. You live or die based on England." And Gandhi knew that that's what they were doing, and so symbolically, he organized a march to the sea where hundreds of thousands of Indians, including Gandhi himself, marched to the ocean and made their own salt, and then began to sell it. And he was arrested for that, as were many of his followers. But again, that's just another example of Gandhi using symbolism and passive resistance against the British. And I want to point something out. At any point, the Indians, if they had wanted to, rise up and kill all the Englishmen in India, they could have done it in a heartbeat. India has over 1 billion people. Back then, they had hundreds and hundreds of millions of people, and the British only had thousands. And so, if Gandhi had said, "Hey, kill every Englishman," they could have done it in a heartbeat. But he did not want to do it. He that was against his belief system. And the other thing is, again, like the British, they knew about the Indian people, that they were divided with the caste system and also religious through religious means. And the British gambled that the Indians could never get together and figure out a way to rise up and gain independence together. Well, that's what Gandhi was trying to do, except he was trying to do it peacefully. All right. We are going to stop there, and we'll pick up on Monday again with Gandhi and learn more about this guy. And I'm going to link some cool videos so you can actually see him and hear him speak. But that's it for today. Peace and love, and I will see you guys on Monday for our last week of school together. By the way, before I forget, we are going to set up a class Zoom call next week, and so are all of your teachers. So get ready to be hammered with Zoom calls, but I'll try and set something up where we can get together and say goodbye and see each other's beautiful faces before we split for the summer. So that'll be sometime next week, and I'll put an announcement out so we can meet. All right. See you guys on Monday.